Today we're going to do a little scenery work, and I'm going to show you how to use a unique building material called Hydrocal to form a base for the mountainous type scenery on your layout. In this particular spot on my layout, I've got a low track here on the river division and a high track here on what I'm going to call the mountain division. And what we're going to do today is just build a little embankment here from the high track down to the low track, using some very simple materials and virtually no tools. The materials you need to do this scenery work are very simple. We need some masking tape and newspaper, some paper towels that I've actually cut off. They were originally that long and I've just sawed through them with a saber saw. A couple of containers, one marked dry to hold the Hydrocal, one marked wet for the water, something to mix the Hydrocal in and something to mix it with, and a mixture of special water. Now, I'll tell you what I mean by special water in just a minute. The unique thing about Hydrocal is that this is all you need for your scenery support. A little newspaper and some masking tape. You don't need to get into screening or chicken wire or all that other stuff that's so hard to work with. This is it. Now, here's how we begin to make the scenery support structure for this. I'm just going to string a few pieces of masking tape from the upper track down to the joist on the lower track, leaving a little slack so that the mountain's got room to bow out here at the top. Doesn't matter that I'm putting the tape right across the spline roadbed. It's not thick enough to hurt anything. And we'll put that there. We'll bring this one down and maybe we'll put it underneath the roadbed so we can attach it here. And again, leaving enough slack so that the mountain can bulge out a little bit. And maybe one more. One more right here. That might be a little too much slack, and if you get too much slack, you just pull it down until it looks like it's about right. That'll work. Okay. Now all we got to do is crumple some newspaper and stick it up underneath that. The paper will stick to the tape, and that will form our scenery support. Here we go. I think I'll unfold it first. Just stick it up underneath there and press the tape on it. It looks kind of silly to start with, but believe me, this is all you have to do. And in actual fact, the nice thing about this approach is, after the Hydrocal hardens, you can go underneath there and pull the paper back out. You don't have to leave all this newspaper under your layout. And we'll put the last piece in, just let it stick up here, something like that. Now, I'm sure that looks horrible. In fact, there are holes through it I can see through to the background. But you don't have to cover the whole area. As you'll see when we start laying the Hydrocal on here, it's going to fill this area in. We're going to end up with a nice little ravine coming down here because that's just the way the paper happened to fall. The more haphazard you are about it, the better it's going to look. This is Hydrocal. Looks just like plaster. It's a very fine white powder, but it's not plaster. It's actually a form of gypsum cement. And that's what makes Hydrocal so unique. Because it is a cement and not a plaster, it's very, very strong. It actually dries when it cures to a form of alabaster rock. Now, I mentioned before about special water. Well, there's nothing really special about this other than it's got a little vinegar in it. The reason you might need to use vinegar is because Hydrocal sets up pretty fast, especially if you have hard water. If you live in an area that has naturally soft water, you may not need to use any vinegar. The vinegar serves as a retarder to slow down the chemical reaction and give you enough time to work with the Hydrocal before it begins to set up. There really isn't any way for me to tell you how much vinegar you need in the water. In my case, we have fairly hard water where I happen to live, and I have found that about 3 ounces of plain distilled white vinegar to a gallon of water slows down the reaction just about right to the point where I've got about 10 or 15 minutes to work with the Hydrocal before it starts to turn buttery. The mixing ratio for Hydrocal is 2 to 1. 2 parts Hydrocal to 1 part water. And what I've found makes an easy-to-use batch is 2 cups of Hydrocal and 1 cup of water. Now when you mix the Hydrocal, you mix the water, you put the water in first. And I'm just going to dump the 1 cup of water treated with the vinegar into the container. Then you carefully sift in the powder. And you might think at first that, gee, 2 cups of powder to 1 cup of water, that'll never work, but believe me, it will. This stuff soaks up the water because of its chemical nature. You can see through the side of the tub there that this stuff is just soaking the water up to beat the band. Once you get it all in, some of it's not going to be down in the water, so just use your spatula to move it around, let the water flow into the various places. It'll start getting a buttery consistency. What we're looking for is kind of a thick, soupy consistency. And you do have to stir it a little bit, and I find that sometimes just mashing it down like this helps. And you have to be sure that all of the Hydrocal is thoroughly dissolved in the water. Okay, I've shortened the time a little bit here on the video. This actually took me maybe 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes to get thoroughly mixed to where I've got a kind of a soupy mixture. Now, here's where the fun starts. We're going to take the paper towels and the mixture of plaster, and we're just going to dip the towel in the plaster. If the consistency is right, it will soak right into the towel very quickly and will not lay on the side or fail to soak in. You'll be able to see it soak into the towel, and the towel will come out like this, completely covered, but you don't see the grain of the paper in there. And I'm just going to lay that up there like that. You can see how right here we've already got a little point taking place, a little point shaping up in the rock. And again, just haphazard, throw it on there. Don't worry about little spots that may show through. We take care of those later. This is just to get a general shape for the mountain, for the scenery. We'll lay one up here. And it looks like we're going to have our normal setup time of about, 10 minutes before it gets to the point where you can't work with it anymore. As you're working with it with the towels, it will be this kind of a thick, soupy liquid. When it gets to the point where it is about ready to start setting up, it's going to turn buttery. And it's just about ready to do that. And I've got a towel here, as you can see, that wasn't anywhere nearly completely covered. So just take some stuff out of the pan and spread it over the towel, covering it up. And at the same time, you're adding thickness to the mixture, which ultimately adds strength. Now, I want to show you a couple of nice things that are happening here. And they're just happening by accident. I mean, we haven't planned this. And that's the nice thing about doing scenery, is that these things typically do happen just by accident. And that is that we've got a nice gorge that has developed here that I kind of thought would happen just by the way the newspapers went in. And I'm just now filling in some of the spaces up at the top that didn't get fully covered with the plaster when we first put it down. All I need to take care of this little spot where the weight of the plaster compressed the paper underneath is a couple more pieces of newspaper. And all I'm going to do is just kind of stuff them in from the backside to provide some additional support for the next layer of towels, and they'll just lay right on there and give us a nice little embankment right down to the existing track. Now we'll just lay some towels in there, and I'm going to rub it along the edge of the wood. Now I happen to have spline road bed, but it doesn't matter if you've got cookie cutter road bed, whatever it is. This stuff will bond to the wood just like it was Elmer's glue, in fact even stronger, I think. And that's what actually ends up supporting this thing against the weight of the plaster, the way it bonds to the wood, at least until it dries, of course. Then it will support itself. For the high peaks in the mountains that you might be building, all you need to do to support the initial structure is to put in a 1x1 or 1x2, any piece of scrap lumber, stick it up in the air and attach the masking tape to it, put the newspaper underneath it, just as we've done here on this low section. One more thing, this can be pretty messy work. You really need to have a drop cloth, a plastic drop cloth on the floor underneath your work area to catch any of the hydrocal that might drip through onto the floor. Even on a concrete floor, if the hydrocal hits the floor and then dries and you don't notice it, it'll bond to the concrete just as it has bonded to the wood up here, and it is a heck of a job to get it off the floor.